What is there, everybody? Welcome here to the first edition of the Optimal presented by FTN Network and FTN Daily. I'm your host, Kyla Murray at DFS on Twitter is where you can find me, and I am super excited to be doing this show each and every day, Monday through Friday. 2 p.m. Eastern time is going to be the typical time. Schedules might change here and there, but 2 p.m. Eastern time is going to be the time scheduled and planned upon. So hopefully you guys can all tune in each day, Monday through Friday, and we're going to discuss some of our favorite DFS topics around the industry, whether that be baseball playoffs, Monday Night Football like we have tonight, NBA preseason like we also have kicking off tonight. Lots of different topics that we can discuss, but the show is going to be centered around the tools and the optimizer that we have at FTN Daily. We're going to be walking through how I use certain tools and the optimizer to build lineups for specific sports or do specific things within those tools and within the optimizer. So again, appreciate you all tuning in, and these are going to be free every single day, Monday through Friday. So hopefully we're going to be able to make a little community out of this thing, and we're going to have a good time bringing here this show Monday through Friday. Like I mentioned, it's called the Optimal. We had a couple of names being discussed for the show, but we ended up settling with the Optimal because nowadays everyone really loves to work on building those optimal lineups. And obviously with the optimizer being a highlighted tool that we're going to be using here on this show, it's going to be something that we're running out there a lot, doing a lot of screen share. We're going to do that for 2 different sports today. So that's going to be the theme of the show. And appreciate, again, all the support and you guys tuning in. Again, presented by FTN Network and FTN Daily. Let's get right into it. Let's talk about some Monday Night Football. We're going to take a look at the optimizer, taking a look at some of the projections, some of the maybe rules and groups that we like to use here on the Showdown slate. Let's get right into it. So here on the screen now, we have the brand new NFL optimizer here, which you guys, if you guys haven't already had a chance to use and take a good look at, hopefully you guys go ahead and subscribe over at FTN Daily. Promo code KMUR gets you 20% off, but the optimizer has been great. It's been very helpful, especially right now, balancing multiple different sports. And then when NBA starts, at one point in time, we're going to have 4 main sports that I play going live at once. So hopefully you guys are able to get in over there and use optimizers. We have 4 different optimizers for the 4 major sports, PGA, MLB, NBA, and NFL. And again, we're going to have a time where we have all 4 of those going live. So it's going to be a little bit of a hectic time. So this optimizer is going to help me build those lineups. But I wanted to take a look at some of the, the projections and stuff for the Monday Night Football. Here we have the Chargers taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. Should be a pretty interesting game. Both teams have, in my opinion, been very solid teams, and the Raiders probably performing a bit above expectations so far. But it should be a good one here on Monday Night Football, as most Monday Night Football games are. I will say we've kind of been spoiled by the Monday Night Football here. So again, you can kind of filter in between single game and between the main slate stuff there. But again, we're going to talk about the single game stuff to start, and then we're actually going to look into the back test mode to talk about the week 4 recap. Each week I do a week 4 or a week in review. This week it will be for week 4, but every Tuesday I put on our YouTube channel, free for everyone, a week in review where I run through the top scorers and talk about some strategy based on that week, and those are free on the YouTube channel. But we're actually going to be able to do those here now live each and every week. But I typically do those videos on Tuesdays, but I can run these out here on Mondays now. So let's get right into the Monday Night Football review, though, or preview, I should say. So looking at the ownership, the projections and the ceiling projections, we don't have ownership in there yet, but for DraftKings, we'll have Alex Blickel does a great job with these single game ownership projections for not only in general, but for captain mode or MVP mode and the flex mode. So it's pretty crucial and important, especially in my process when you're talking about a lot of times we're guessing in terms of who's going to be the most popular on these showdown slates. But now Alex gives us a really strong baseline to work off of. So a little bit later in the day, those will be live in the optimizer as well and live on the site where he posts those in his table with the single game showdown ownership projections. But looking at the quarterbacks, Herbert, Derek Carr has been throwing the ball essentially as much as he possibly can. Josh Jacobs still banged up. They're going to test him out, see if they can. Schefter said they're going to test him out prior to the game, see if he can run out there after missing weeks 2 and 3. So it'd be interesting to see if he's going to be out there and if that affects the kind of game plan we've seen from the Raiders so far this year. But again, here looks like both quarterbacks have pretty solid projections. 23 points for Herbert, 20.5 for Derek Carr. Those are going to be guys that are going to pop into a lot of your showdown lineups. So it's going to be kind of important and crucial to decipher whether or not you want to roster both of those guys, and then also using these rules and these stacking options and player combination rules here to make sure you're correlating those players as well. Because like I mentioned, they're going to be popular. So with those guys being able to using these stacking options and combination rules, being able to correlate them is going to be very crucial in terms of building successful DFS lineups for your showdown slates. Onto the running backs. Eckler, we do have Jacobs projected to play right now. Peyton Barber, I ended up just projecting them a 50-50 split until we get more news. So they basically have the same projection right now because, again, don't know who's going to really start yet. But that'll update as we get closer to lock. And then obviously an hour and a half before game time, we will have official word on Jacobs. Kenyon Drake kind of took a step back in that role last week where we saw Peyton Barber rush for 2 touchdowns and have a monster game. Probably one of his best games of his career. But yeah, then pretty much in LA, you have the Austin Eckler show, and then everyone else behind him is going to be a rotating headache. As to wide receivers, Mike Williams probably been one of the more impressive, I guess, most improved players so far this year at the wide receiver position. He's been phenomenal. If you drafted him in season long, you're probably extremely happy. If you've been playing him in DFS, you're definitely happy. I believe it was 37 DraftKings points last week. So continues to be a key producer, and he does look like the new red zone target there in that offense with Hunter Henry obviously leaving, heading over to New England. We saw him score last night, but now with him gone, Mike Williams seems to be stepping into that role where and when they're in the red zone and Herbert's looking for that big mismatch, it looks like Williams is that guy, which makes a lot of sense. He's going to be a mismatch on a lot of people just because of that size. So good to see that for Mike Williams there. Henry Ruggs, Hunter Renfrow, Bryan Edwards, the 3 main receivers for the Raiders. They also kind of get mixed into each other in terms of taking away from each other's production. Henry Ruggs is the big play guy. You can kind of take some darts on him, hoping that he makes that big play like we saw. I believe it was week 2 against the Steelers when he caught the 70 or 75-yard touchdown. That's kind of what you hope for if you're rostering Ruggs, right? You're hoping that he makes that big splash play. But I will say the targets have been more consistent this year than they were last year. Still not overly consistent, especially considering how much they're throwing the ball here in Las Vegas. But still, when you're rostering Ruggs, that's kind of what you're hoping for. You're hoping for that big splash play. Hunter Renfrow has also been very good. He was kind of the talk of the town after the week 3 matchup when he ran that route in the middle of the field prior to scoring that touchdown. Everyone was obsessed with that route. You know, that kind of happens in the fantasy circle where we'll get a clip of someone doing something cool, and you know, I'm victim of it too. But then it'll circulate so much to where everybody is buzzing about this guy. Hunter Renfrow actually had some buzz earlier in the week. Not necessarily in regards to DFS, but like waivers and all that stuff. He was a big name in terms of people that were going around. It seemed like last Monday and Tuesday, people were either talking about Josh Gordon or Hunter Renfrow. So that was interesting. But Bryan Edwards, also a guy who not really targeted consistently, but we've seen him come into play late in games. Week 1, he was held without a catch until the 4th quarter when he had 2 catches in the final drive, and obviously the Raiders went on to beat the Ravens in overtime. But I believe it was in week 2 when they played overtime as well. He had a clutch overtime catch that I believe was a touchdown that got called back down to the 1-yard line, if I remember correctly. But again, that's kind of what you're hoping for out of Bryan Edwards. You're kind of hoping for a touchdown there. And the price on FanDuel, as you can see here, isn't really all that cheap. He's about $500 less than Renfrow, but both of those guys are significantly cheaper than Ruggs. So I think I would actually prefer taking a shot on someone like Renfrow or Edwards just because of the price. Like where Ruggs is, you know, you find a little bit of extra salary, and then there you are with Keenan Allen. And I think we all are in agreement that if we are using a Raiders pass catcher, Darren Waller's probably the guy. And speaking of Darren Waller, let's head over to tight ends. 15-point projection, almost a 24-point ceiling projection. Keep in mind this is on FanDuel, so no full point PPR. So projections probably look a little bit lower. Jared Cook, Foster Moreau, Donald Parham, Steven Anderson, all getting some projections there. But anyway, Darren Waller's the tight end to own if you're looking to roster a tight end here. Jared Cook is fine if you're playing Justin Herbert, maybe a Justin Herbert captain lineup. Maybe he'll appear in some of the rules there and whatnot. But overall, not a guy I'm looking to overly get exposed to there. I think if I'm looking for a tight end here, it's Darren Waller bust there. When you talk about FanDuel, real quick, let's talk about some strategy stuff. FanDuel, obviously the prices don't change as you roster players. So like last night, for example, there was like a case to be made for rostering somebody like Nelson Aguilar in the captain spot, or you know last Sunday night, Trey Sermon in the captain spot was a popular option because he was so cheap and you could get everybody else in. That's not really the case for FanDuel, where the prices don't change based on that MVP spot. They don't get that 1.5 boost on their price. It does still apply to their score, but not towards the price. So typically at the MVP spot, you're going to want the highest possible scorer there. And typically that's going to be the quarterbacks in terms of projections, right? And on FanDuel, when you're talking half point PPR, does take away from some of the viability of some of these receivers. But I think that also, conduces into some lower ownership, right? So someone like Mike Williams, I think, is actually a really interesting MVP play tonight on FanDuel for a couple of reasons. One, I think he'll be less popular because he's pretty expensive, but he deserves the price tag, right? He's been heavily involved in the passing game, and he's their red zone target right now. So he deserves the price tag, but I think people are going to see, wow, Mike Williams is 1,500 more than Keenan Allen on FanDuel. I'm just going to play Keenan Allen. He's their number one receiver, right? But I also think based on the FanDuel scoring, it actually works a little bit in favor of Mike Williams in terms of him being the red zone guy. He's probably more likely to score the touchdown and all that stuff. So I think Mike Williams is probably going to be one of the more under the radar FanDuel MVP plays over there. So I think he makes a ton of sense. Austin Eckler, I think, is going to be a fairly popular option as well. And I think he's a totally fine option. He's been very good, especially after week one when he was not really involved in the passing game. That turned around quickly in weeks 2 and 3. He's been heavily involved in the passing game since. And again, like I mentioned, you don't really get the full point PPR effect on FanDuel, but he makes a lot of sense on DraftKings, and he still makes a ton of sense on FanDuel, where he's also been the exclusive red zone running back in that scenario there for the Chargers. Herbert and Carr are going to be the popular options in terms of looking to pay up here. Especially at quarterback and especially in the MVP spot. Again, like I mentioned, those are just the two guys that are always going to typically project the best. Like typically in games where we have a single game slate or a showdown slate or whatever, the quarterbacks are going to project to be the top two highest scorers. So for that reason, they're going to be probably the more popular MVP spots, especially on FanDuel, where, like I mentioned, the prices don't go up or down according to that position in the roster, right? So I do think Herbert and Carr are going to be very popular. I think if you're building for a unique lineup, going away from quarterback and the MVP spot always makes sense because you're inherently going to have lower ownership on those guys. But still, if you wanted to build a more optimal lineup, I think Herbert and Carr are the way to go. Let's talk about some of these different features that we have in the optimizer here. Now, one thing that's important for showdowns is the salary, right? David Jones are one of our main showdown guys at FTN Daily, who does a lot of great stuff, and he just hit I think it was $46,000 showdown score, I think a week ago. And it seems like he's winning a showdown slate at least once a week. He's a very big proponent on not using all of your salary. And you can do that really quickly here on FanDuel or on DraftKings, but you can do it really quickly here in the optimizer, cap that salary right here. You can, limit to make sure you're leaving $500 on the table, make sure you're leaving $1,000 on the table, whatever you want to do. Again, on FanDuel's pricing is a little bit different. You only go up in $500 increments. So let's say we wanted to leave $59,000 as the max salary there. That's kind of how you would treat that scenario. But I'm assuming a lot of people will actually do the $500 on the table. If you're looking to be a bit more contrarian, I would say capping it at $1,000 is probably the way to go. So that's a quick thing to do there. Again, once we get the ownership in there for DraftKings, you can force certain people under a certain amount of ownership into your lineup, and you can do it based on certain positions as well, which is very cool. On main slates, I really like to do this for receivers typically. I'll make sure that I have one receiver under 10% in lineups. So that's a really cool feature as well. Works a little bit better on main slates, but on these showdown slates, it's also helpful. However, it seems like everybody has, a significant amount of ownership. That's a good play. So make sure you're adjusting accordingly based on those percentages that you're seeing. Like, for example, we're probably going to see a lot of these top plays, a lot of these viable plays, at least get 20 plus. So probably under 20 under 25 would probably be a better number compared to on the main slate where you can find plenty of good plays that are under 10%. So also you can use the randomization there to get some standard deviation built into the projections there. That's just to say, if let's say we set it to 10%. In certain lineups, instead of building every single lineup according to these projections, because as we know, these projections aren't, going to be 100% accurate. It's just not how they work. So in these lineups, we're going to add a 10% increase or decrease to projections at times to ensure that we get some randomization and some variance in our lineups to just account for, the flaws that the projections do have. You can set a certain number of lines, and a lot of people like to build 150. Let's just leave it at 10 for now. But one other thing I wanted to talk about in this optimizer for the single game stuff, and I love this feature for all of the modes, but especially for Showdown, and that's tournament mode versus optimal mode. So optimal mode is basically just going to build the lineups as your projections, kind of tell you, right? And then obviously they'll factor in the randomization and all the rules and all that stuff. But if you set it to tournament mode, it's actually going to account for, kind of a shuffle is what I like to describe it as. So instead of just filtering in all of the top end projected plays at the top in terms of your lineups and in terms of your builds, it's going to shuffle those guys in. So for example, at the top of the projections, we have Herbert, Carr, and Eckler. So if we're running based on optimal mode, we're going to see those three occur in a lot of lineups together. With shuffle mode or with tournament mode, it's going to actually shuffle those guys around each other to make sure you're getting some diversification within your builds. You're still going to have plenty of lineups with those three together, but you're also going to be able to shuffle them around and get some different combinations and just add to your overall diversification of your builds. So that's one thing that I highly recommend using when using the optimizer. And I think that's probably my favorite thing so far. But talking about some stacking rules, and then we'll head over to the recap. So here you're just basically saying it's basically if then rules is kind of how I like to describe it. So we'll start off with the quarterbacks, right? I think this is the best way to get a feel for it. And David Jones actually does a great job at giving you some rules in his article every Showdown Slate. He'll give his favorite rules, whether, sometimes it'll be tricky to decipher, which pass catchers do I want with the quarterback, which running backs or receivers do I not want paired with each other in the same lineup. And David Jones does a really good job at providing what he's doing each and every Showdown Slate in the article. He talks about a lot of groups that he runs, and he talks about players that mesh or don't mesh well together. So we're going to say if Derek Carr is in the captain or flex, then we want to stack with, no less than one. I would actually set it to no less than two. But you can do one if you want. But in my opinion, if you're going to have a quarterback in a single game spot where you're having him in your MVP or your captain spot, two is probably the way that I would go. And then you can select the players that you would want to stack them with. So Waller, Renfro, Ruggs, Bryan Edwards, Kenyon Drake, guys that we just touched on. Kenyon Drake, again, a running back. So typically some people might not like to pair running backs up with their quarterback. But I think Kenyon Drake is different, a little bit different example. He's been more involved in the passing game, much more involved than someone like Peyton Barber or Josh Jacobs. He's kind of that third down guy. So this would be a rule that I would want. And you go on, you build these rules out and kind of determine the rules that you're going to follow, that the optimizer will follow throughout the whatever amount of lineups that you're looking to build. But it's also going to account for, the shuffle mode, the randomization, all that stuff while doing the modes. But let's take a look at week 4. I want to touch on week 4 here. Look at the main slate. And in here, we load up the final fantasy points for every slate, and you can kind of look and see who are the top scorers, maybe who are the best values, who do we miss on, who do we hit on, etc. But let's start at the quarterback position. Sam Darnold at the top. Again, I mean, I actually made a joke about Sam Darnold in the Discord, which actually looks really bad now. But I made a joke. I was like, well, you're probably not going to get, Sam Darnold too right. I did like Sam Darnold, but I mentioned that I probably would like him more if I was able to double stack or, bring some run backs. Because I think, the more oftentimes where Darnold hit a ceiling or he succeeded, it was probably in a good game environment where multiple pass catches for him exceeded or, maybe some run backs did well. That wasn't really the case. It was kind of a mess in terms of the entire game, right? Dalton Schultz and Cedric Wilson scored the touchdowns for the Cowboys. Amari Cooper had one too, but CeeDee Lamb was basically irrelevant. Robbie Anderson scored like 9 points. Marshall didn't really do anything either. But I made a joke. I was like, if Sam Darnold if you probably need to pair him with two guys because he's probably not hitting a ceiling unless he gets 2 rushing touchdowns again, and then go figure, he finds the end zone on the ground twice once again to add on to his lead in terms of the NFL rushing total, rushing touchdown total. He's the current leader in the clubhouse in that fact, and if you predicted that, good for you. You probably have a magic 8 ball or some future seeing ability, and that's pretty cool. But also, Sam Darnold, dual threat quarterback. Maybe that's something to monitor going forward. But Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, 2 guys that I was pretty high on myself. Matt Ryan and Taylor Heinicke were also guys that I was pretty high on, and the model liked a pretty good amount. But they just weren't guys that I played in a lot of main lineups, and that was probably ended up being a mistake. I kind of figured they didn't really have the same kind of ceiling that Mahomes and Dak Prescott and even Kyler Murray had. And again, like, they probably don't have that upside, but we didn't really see massive ceiling games from any other quarterback. Like Darnold probably hit one of his top end outcomes. Mahomes had 32. Like, we definitely can see better games from Mahomes there, especially considering the game that Tyreek Hill had. But Darrell Williams rushing touchdown. Just a weird game there for the Kansas City Chiefs. All the guys that score there outside of Hill, whether it be Darrell Williams, Clyde Edwards through the air, Jody Fortson through the air, like, just a pretty awkward scenario in terms of some guys that scored. So you probably didn't really get an optimal outcome from your Kansas City stack, especially if you're using Travis Kelce. But you can see in the projections, Heineke for 20, Matt Ryan for 19. Like, these weren't guys that I had like projected poorly or anything. They just weren't guys that I got to a ton in main lineups because I didn't think that they had massive ceilings in comparison to some other guys. But quarterback position was kind of I think the biggest surprise was Daniel Jones. Obviously Sam Darnold being the number 1 quarterback was a surprise there, but I think Daniel Jones was actually the biggest surprise. I mean, it was not a good matchup there, and he performed very well. 400 plus yards, only threw for 2 touchdowns, and he still was able to have a top end game there for Daniel Jones. So obviously got a little bit of help with the overtime where he got the 400 yards because overtime, but still good performance there from Danny Dimes, who a lot of people rag on, but he's been pretty good. He's been pretty solid this year, I will say. He's been pretty sustainable for fantasy purposes, and he's been pretty cheap for the most part. So overall, if you've been rostering Daniel Jones or you have him in season long, you're probably not unhappy with him. So he's been pretty good this year. Aaron Rodgers, Kyla Murray, Russell Wilson, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, big names that just really didn't have any ceiling performances. Josh Allen, he was one of my favorite. He's actually probably my favorite quarterback play. Didn't really pan out, obviously, with the massive blowout. They won 40-0, and we always knew that was going to be a possible risk for Buffalo. 40-0, it's probably a bit bigger of a blowout than most people expected. It was a 17-point spread, though, so it's not like it's like shocking. But hey, that's what you get when you roster some offense when they are 17-point favorites. However, it did go a bit unlucky in terms of the touchdown outcomes. Zach Moss had another rushing touchdown. That's going to happen at times, though. But overall, Stephon Diggs didn't score either. So Dawson Knox caught 2 of the touchdowns. So if you rostered Josh Allen and you didn't use Dawson Knox, probably wasn't a great scenario for you, as Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley were either average or underwhelming. So on to running backs now. Cordell Patterson. Cordell Patterson's been the most frustrating guy in the world for me this year. I keep playing Mike Davis, and Mike Davis finally scored too, but Mike Davis didn't do nearly enough. But Cordell Patterson's playing like 33% of the snaps and scoring every time he touches the ball, it seems. 3 receiving touchdowns is just, it's actually crazy to think. I'm trying to think of players who might have produced more unlikely outcomes in terms of fantasy scoring and stuff like that than Cordell Patterson right now, and I can't think of any. He has 6 touchdowns this year already, maybe even more. He had 3 last week, but I think he had 1 in each. No, I think he has 7. I think he has 7 touchdowns this year, and he's playing like 30% of the snaps. Like, it's, I don't know. Maybe he'll earn more snaps now, but it's not like he was playing bad before. It's just, I think he's just not a guy that's going to play all the snaps, which is probably the right move, right? But anyway, it's kind of a whole mess with Cordell Patterson, and how much I'm using him or I guess how little I'm using him and how much he's burning me in terms of I'm rostering guys like Mike Davis every week, playing Kyle Pitts not last week, but the 2 weeks before that. So yeah, it's been a whole mess with Cordell Patterson. So like when I, lay down and go to sleep, he's the guy like haunting my nightmares and the one allowing me not to sleep. But Cordell Patterson's been a mess, in my opinion, in terms of what he's been doing to my life, aka ruining it. But that's okay. Saquon Barkley, good performance in a tough matchup. Two Gun was very high on Saquon Barkley. I mean, great call by him. It's kind of what you get for Saquon Barkley, under 7K. We know he has the explosiveness, and that's what he did. He went out there and he, had that big receiving touchdown. Then obviously scored again in overtime to seal the game. So I think that was a sharp call. Obviously, he was projecting for less than 6% ownership here, so made a lot of sense to play him in terms of the ownership play. Henry, Montgomery were extremely popular and they performed well, both 25 plus points. And if you faded them, you probably didn't feel great about it. I mean, maybe you were okay with Henry, maybe at 29. Like, they didn't like Tyreek Hill you or anything like that. But still, Derrick Henry was very popular and he performed pretty well. Montgomery, especially at that price, Montgomery smashed that price. Jonathan Taylor was a strong, low owned play. Same with Ezekiel Elliott. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a good value play again. Najee Harris, strong chalk play again. Chase Edmonds, guy averaged 10 yards a carry last week. I mean, he just looks explosive as ever. And he obviously did pretty well for that price tag as well. James Conner as well. So, okay, that just brings me to a point about Kyla Murray, right? If you rostered Kyla Murray, you're probably pretty upset because he didn't do that well. And also the receivers didn't really do anything either outside of AJ Green, who caught that 40-yard touchdown. But James Conner scored twice again. Chase Edmonds had 120 yards on the ground. I mean, just things that probably aren't going to happen a lot more. I mean, I know James Conner did it twice in back-to-back weeks, but Chase Edmonds, if you told me Chase Edmonds won't break 100 yards on the ground again, I wouldn't be that surprised. I mean, especially considering the kind of role that he's ironing out. Surely 10 yards a carry, that's a big number. So again, those are probably two things that are a bit unlucky if you rostered Kyler Murray, and obviously him being under 3% owned, and DeAndre Hopkins being 3% owned. Like those are nice tournament plays that just didn't really pan out, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were bad plays there. McKissick went off in the late stage of the game there when they were kind of in comeback mode and catch up mode, and obviously he had that awesome touchdown where Heineke rolled left and McKissick was just wide open at the line of scrimmage on the right, and he went down and dove over three people to score. So that was pretty cool. A cool touchdown there. But after that, Jeremy McNichols was up there in terms of scoring. Darrell Henderson was a strong tournament play. I think a lot of people got kind of away from him or scared of him because of the injury concern there, but he looked pretty solid. Wide receivers, Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel, DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, Corey Davis, and Randall Cobb were the main top scorers. Obviously, Devonta Smith, Darnell Mooney, and Stephon Diggs round out the top 10 or so, but a lot of familiar names in terms of popular plays. DJ Moore, Deebo Samuel. Tyreek Hill wasn't really too popular, but he had some ownership on him. Corey Davis was not necessarily popular, but a key play in that range. Like a lot of people got to him if they were in that range, myself included, but nobody else did anything for me. So that didn't really turn out too great. Darnell Mooney, I think, was one of the better plays. My issue with Darnell Mooney was I paired him up with DeAndre Swift in a lot of lineups. So that obviously didn't pan out too great, but Darnell Mooney looked great. So that was pretty cool. Summer League DFS was ham, and preseason DFS will be too. Looking forward to grinding with all. Yeah, I mean that'll segue us into the next point there. We're going to talk about some preseason stuff there. Not really a lot of info coming from myself, but I'm going to talk about some stuff that we're going to have over at FTN for preseason. Last year, Kawhisenberg, Zach Graham, Kawhisenberg DFS, and Josh Gross, and Stefano, and Eddie, they all absolutely killed preseason. They were just all over all the reports that you could possibly want to know about. And obviously they had a good feel for a lot of the rotations and a lot of the guys getting key minutes, and they crushed preseason basically the whole time, right? So I'm counting on that again from those guys, and that starts tonight. So we'll touch on that a little bit here in a few minutes. But Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel, DJ Moore, those are the guys that you kind of needed in your lineups to really have the big splash weeks. Obviously, Tyreek Hill scored 50 points, so if you didn't have him, you're behind the eight ball, especially when he was over 10% owned, and basically every contest got up to like 15, 16 and some. But Deebo Samuel and DJ Moore, with them being under 7K, same with Terry McLaurin as well. With those guys being under 7K and then having the 33 plus performances, it did kind of lead to you not necessarily needing those guys, but it definitely helped to have those guys. So obviously, Moore was one of the more popular plays. I know a lot of people were potentially considering fading him. I had him as a core play, and I changed it Sunday morning because of the ownership. I did pivot to Deebo Samuel, so that worked out. But I mean, it would have been great to have a lot of lineups with both. So that's kind of the scenario there with the wide receivers. But on to tight end. Tight end, again, been a key talking point for me all year long, really. And it's kind of been the same thing. This week specifically was a bit of a mess if you've been considering tight end the same way that I've been considering tight end. And that's, a lot of these lower end guys just don't have the kind of upside that certain players have on any given slate, like Kelsey and Waller. Obviously, Waller wasn't on the main slate, but Kittle even is a guy that I consider with that kind of ceiling. But we saw one player crack 20, and that was Dawson Knox, who scored twice. He's the third guy, only the third guy in a main slate to score 20-plus points on the main slate so far this year. T.J. Hockenson and Travis Kelsey did it in week one. In weeks 2 and 3, no tight end scored 20-plus. And finally, here in week 4, we had a tight end get back over 20 points, and that was Dawson Knox, who scored twice. Dawson Knox he's been good. He's been heavily involved in that offense, and he's been a guy they're looking for down there in the red zone. So Mo Cox also scored twice. Dalton Schultz scored once. Max Williams scored once. Gesicki scored once. Goddard should have scored twice. Noah Fant scored once, Ertz scored, and Mark Andrews had an 11-point performance without scoring, but he had a touchdown called back. He had a 30-yard touchdown that got called back, which was a bummer if you rostered him, but I don't think many people were on there. But again, like this goes to show, like, if you're looking to punt these guys, if you're looking to save some salary at tight end, it makes so much sense to correlate them with your quarterback, because as you can see, these guys are only really hitting value or hitting ceiling performances because they're scoring touchdowns, right? The only guy in this top 10 or so that had 10 plus points without scoring a touchdown was Mark Andrews. So that goes to show correlating these players, these cheap tight ends, makes so much sense, because obviously if your quarterback has an elite performance or a ceiling outcome, they're scoring 3-4, passing touchdowns, and that's going to be able to trickle down to those tight ends at times. So that is why I've been kind of talking about it at nauseum so far this year. But if you're using a cheap tight end, you should almost always be looking to pair them with your quarterback or correlate them in some fashion, just to increase the likelihood that they score a touchdown. And that might sound weird. It's like, oh, just because you play Dawson Knox with Josh Allen doesn't mean he's going to have a better chance at scoring a touchdown. That's not what I'm quite trying to say. The point is, if you're building a lineup with Josh Allen and he doesn't have a ceiling game, your lineup's already dead, right? So it doesn't really matter what anybody else does. But if Josh Allen goes out and he scores 40 points, that's when you have a chance to actually win a tournament, win a GPP, win a big prize, right? And that's when Josh Allen's ceiling performance happens, that's when Dawson Knox chance of having a ceiling game as well increases. So that's why you always want to correlate the tight end, or just pay up for somebody like Travis Kelsey, who has a high ceiling, even though he was horrible this week. We know he has a ceiling. We've seen it already once or twice this year, and we've seen it almost every week, dating back to the last 3 years, it seems. That's how good Kelsey has been. And even though we had a bad week this week, if you put him at the wide receiver position, he was wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4 amongst all wide receivers. So he's been playing very well this year, and he's kind of the reason why the position's shaking out the way it is, because he created such a tier there at tight end. But again, that is my point at tight end, and I'll probably continue to preach it because I think it's super important to monitor and to continue to use the tight end at a position where you either want to get the elite ceiling in Kelsey or Waller or Kittle even, which Kittle we haven't really seen it from either, but I think he'll be fine. Or you want to correlate that position to increase your chances of having that ceiling game amongst your entire lineup. So on to defense. We had one defense kind of be the hero. I think a couple years back, the Bills would have been very popular, where everyone wanted to play the Bills. Like, it was a clear smash spot for the Bills defense, because they were facing a, a third string quarterback. They're a pretty good defense in themselves, and the Vegas total really pointed to it just being a mess for Houston, right? So I think a few years back we see them be very popular, but people are starting to realize that paying down at defense is kind of the way to go. And it worked out a couple of times here and there. Like, if you played the Jets, they scored 7. You're probably thrilled with that from them. If you played the Seahawks, they got 6 at 2,400. You're probably okay with that. The Colts got 8 at 2,700. So that's probably what a lot of people were doing. I know the Lions were the most popular defense of the week. Let's see where they finished with 3. I mean, at 2,200, at like getting 3 points really isn't that bad. Like, the Falcons were 2,300 and they got 0, and that's like 0 is never great, but at least it's not going backwards there. The bad thing about the Lions is they were so popular and everybody was getting there to where it felt like you needed more out of them if you were going to roster them at that kind of ownership. So again, defense is a spot where I'm trying to pay down and spend as little as possible while not really being aligned with the public on that. I think it's a good spot to get contrarian. Let's see where the optimal lineup was. So the optimal lineup was Sam Darnold paired with DJ Moore, Saquon Barkley, Cordell Patterson, Tyreek Hill, DJ Moore, like I mentioned, Deebo Samuel, Dawson Knox, Randall Cobb, the ghost of Randall Cobb, and Bills defense. So that was the optimal for this week. And again, like Randall Cobb, he was the only real value receiver that separated themselves. I know a lot of people were on Lazard over Randall Cobb, which ended up being a whole mess. Cobb scored twice, but Lazard was playing, the large share of the snaps compared to Randall Cobb. Randall Cobb was essentially non-existent in the offense until then, but obviously scored twice, and that'll go a long way. But this is what the optimal lineup looked like for the week, and the only one that is really surprising is Cordell Patterson. That guy will continue to surprise, and Randall Cobb for that matter. But Patterson will continue to not only surprise me, but probably frustrate me. But we'll see how that goes as we turn on into future weeks. So appreciate you guys tuning in for the recap. We're going to talk about some NBA preseason stuff real quick. So NBA package is live at FTN Daily. We have the early bird package up, which is $224.99 right now. And we had it up for $199, sold out to the first 100 people. So if you missed out on that, I apologize, but you can still get it for $224.99 before it goes up to $250, and then after $250, it'll go up again. This is for the whole year, so it averages out to I think like $30 a month or something like that. But yeah, I think it's a really good spot to get into it now before the price goes up, obviously. And we're gonna have a lot of preseason stuff that I think is a very good edge to have. And like I mentioned, Josh, Eddie, Zach, Steph, they do a lot of really good work in terms of digging through those reports, those beat writer reports on what the preseason is going to entail, and it worked out very nicely last year. Last year, I wasn't really able to put a lot of time into the beat writing, sifting through reports and stuff, but following Zach and Josh's advice and analysis, they do a great job. So I would highly recommend doing that. We're going to have minutes projections from Josh, which is half the battle in preseason DFS. If you can find out who's going to be on the court, you're going a long way in terms of getting an edge there. And 225, that's a steal for the whole year. I agree, Colin. Appreciate that. But yeah, I think that half the battle is getting the minutes up there. And with Josh doing that, he did a great job last year. He'll continue to do that throughout the preseason this year. Zach's going to have a show most days. He'll have a show tonight breaking down the slate. So hopefully you guys are tuning into that. We will have the optimizer up. No projections as of now, just because of it's very difficult to project for the preseason. But if you guys do feel like you have a good feel for it, or maybe you want to input your own projections, or maybe use Josh's minute projections to have your own projections, you can feel free to filter in there. You can change them and make the projections however you see fit, and then you can run lineups using the optimizer. So we will have that live for the preseason. And again, like I mentioned, you can use Josh's minutes projections, which will be live right here. And you can use those to build your own projections in the optimizer and run lineups that way. But appreciate you guys all tuning in. That's going to do it for the first edition of The Optimal, presented by FTN Network and FTN Daily. Again, I'm doing this whole show myself, so if there was any technical errors, I do apologize. Hopefully I will get better. Hopefully we'll get some snazzier graphics and all that stuff. I mean, the graphics are already fire. Shout out to our guy George, who does all the graphics for us. It's like he does them in the matter of seconds, and they're always awesome. So shout out to George. But eventually I'll learn how to work these applications and these programs a bit more to where I can maybe do some more things with it. But again, appreciate you guys tuning in and appreciate you guys sticking with me through this. But we'll be back again tomorrow, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. Going to break down some more NBA stuff, talk about some MLB playoffs tomorrow, and then we're going to take a first look at the NFL slate. So again, hopefully you guys all tune in once again, free every single Tuesday tomorrow, but every single day, Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern time on Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter at Kamer DFS. Again, appreciate you all tuning in. We will see you tomorrow. Until next time, good luck, everybody.